You know, when you think about how a country is born, what usually comes to mind? Revolution, right? War, dramatic upheavals. But what if there's another way? What if a nation could be built on compromise and negotiation instead? Well, that's the incredible and really unique story of Canada. And we're going to dig into exactly how they did it.
Right here, this is what makes Canada's history so different. When you look at the birth of pretty much any other modern nation, you see violent struggle. But for Canada, those things just aren't there. It's a story that's defined just as much by what didn't happen.
So that's the big question we're tackling in this explainer. How did this massive, diverse country come into being without all the violent chaos that shaped so much of the rest of the world?
To find the answer, we have to go way, way back, long before any Europeans arrived, and even before the name Canada was ever spoken. It all starts with the powerful nations who called this land home first.
Just let that sink in for a second. We're not talking about a couple hundred years. We're talking about 12,000 years. This was not an empty land. It was a continent filled with complex, thriving societies that had been there for ages. And these weren't just small groups of people. They were powerful, established nations. You had groups like the Cree, who controlled huge areas of land, the incredibly influential Iroquois Confederacy, the Algonquin, and up in the far north, the Inuit, each one with its own rich culture and a deep, deep connection to the land.
I mean, if you want a perfect example of this resilience, look at the Inuit. They didn't just scrape by in the Arctic. They built a sophisticated and thriving culture in a place most of us would think is completely impossible to live in.
And this number just drives the point home. Can you imagine? Hunting, raising a family, living your life when it's minus 40 degrees. They built their homes out of ice and mastered life on a frozen ocean. This is the deep, strong history that Europeans were about to walk into.
Okay, so into this ancient land, two massive European empires show up. Their arrival in the 1500s changed everything, and it turned North America into a new battlefield for old rivalries.
So you've got two main players here. France. They got there first. And right behind them, Britain. And guess what? They both wanted the exact same things. Gold, the incredibly valuable fur trade, and of course, land. Lots and lots of land. It was basically a recipe for disaster from the very beginning. And this wasn't some quick little spat. Oh no. The rivalry kicked off in the 1600s, and by the 1700s, it had exploded into pretty much constant warfare. For a while there, Canada was a major war zone for these two global superpowers. Finally, in 1763, it all came to a head with a big win for the British.
Now, this is so important. Even though Britain won and English became the main language, the French people who lived there, especially in Quebec, didn't just pack up and leave. Their roots were deep. So Britain made a really pragmatic choice. Instead of trying to crush their culture, they decided to accommodate it. That single decision is what planted the seeds for the officially bilingual Canada we know today.
Okay, so this brings us to the moment where it all happens. Britain is in control, so how does Canada become its own country? Well, true to form, it happens in a really uniquely quiet way.
The whole process back in 1867 was surprisingly simple. 4 provinces just decided to unite. A law was passed and boom, the country of Canada was officially a thing. But look at that third step. It was a new country, but it was still part of the British Empire. This wasn't a clean break. It was a slow, gradual evolution.
And this quote, man, it just says it all, doesn't it? While other places were fighting these incredibly bloody wars for their independence, Canada was being put together through meetings, debates, and acts of parliament. That right there is the key to understanding its peaceful start.
But just because the country was born peacefully didn't mean it would stay that way. The 20th century was coming, and it was going to test this new nation. Canada was about to step out of Britain's shadow and forge its very own identity on the battlefields of 2 world wars.
World War II, in particular, was a massive turning point. The entire country mobilized. The economy just exploded as factories churned out war supplies, and on the battlefield, Canadian soldiers earned incredible respect, especially for being among the very first to storm the beaches on D-Day. This was the moment Canada truly came into its own on the world stage.
And here's one of the wildest parts of this whole story. Even after all that, the final legal ties to Britain weren't cut until 1982. Can you believe that? 1982. Again, there was no war, no rebellion. It was just a final, peaceful, constitutional agreement. Canada's path to full independence was this long, Slow, patient process.
So, with its independence finally complete, what really defines Canada today? Well, more than anything else, it's the fact that it has become a nation built by people from every single corner of the globe. Just look at that number for a second. Today, almost 1 out of every 4 people in Canada is an immigrant. That is a huge statistic, and it's become a core part of the country's identity and, frankly, its economic success.
You know, this didn't just happen by accident. After World War II, Canada needed people, it needed to grow. So it made a conscious choice to open its doors. And waves of newcomers arrived, not just from the traditional places like Europe, but more and more from Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. That deliberate policy is what created one of the most multicultural societies on the entire planet. So when you zoom out and look at the whole journey, it's just incredible. From this vast, frozen land of ancient nations, through 100 years of imperial conflict, to a quiet birth and a modern multicultural identity. What a transformation.
And it all happened without all the violent mile markers of nation-building that you see almost everywhere else. It's a history that was shaped by survival, by negotiation, and by immigration, not by revolution.
Of course, the story is never really over, is it? Which leaves us with a final thought. In a world that feels more and more divided, can this Canadian model of peaceful evolution and multiculturalism keep going strong? What's the next chapter in the story of this nation that was forged in peace?